It can definitely be argued that Dave Ramsey is the face of personal finance content, whether it's on YouTube, the radio, TV, or even on the live stage. The dude is everywhere, and he's been doing it for a long time, since 1992 to be exact. If you're familiar with Dave, then you already have an idea of why we are here. Saying that Dave has issued some controversial advice in the past would be putting it lightly. A quick search on the web would reveal that pretty much everything Dave has said or taught has been widely criticized by the public. And don't take this video the wrong way, because I am not saying that all that criticism is valid. In fact, I think overall, Dave Ramsey offers solid, easy to follow advice that has helped thousands, if not millions, of Americans get out of debt and start building wealth. His positive impact on society cannot be ignored. But that being said, I definitely do not agree with everything that Dave teaches. If you haven't listened to much of Dave, well, he's very risk averse and he's very opposed to debt. In fact, he hates debt with a burning passion, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Most people would definitely be better off if debt was completely removed from their lives. But his level of risk aversion would definitely go against some of the ways that people optimize their finances. And Dave's advice is also very simple and easy to follow, which again is not a bad thing. But some of the assumptions and simplifications that Dave makes some of his advice either unrealistic or outdated. So that being said, for this video, let's go over Dave Ramsey's financial principles that I disagree with. I will break down exactly why I don't like them and how I think they should be changed or updated. But before we do that, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you can stay up to date on all of my latest videos. We're also trying to get to 350 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it. Thanks. All right, the first thing that we're going to discuss is credit cards. Like I said, if you start watching Dave's content, it will become clear very quickly that he hates debt with an absolute burning passion. Before becoming the world famous financial guru, Dave was actually a real estate investor, and he used debt to build up his portfolio. Well, eventually, one day his business would come crumbling down, and because he was in debt, he eventually had to file for bankruptcy. And from that moment, he swore to never borrow money again for any reason, which has fueled his teachings and his career. And this hate for debt especially applies to credit cards. Dave's view is that the credit card industry preys on the middle and lower classes in America, and he also teaches that credit cards just make it too easy for people to buy things that they cannot afford and live a lifestyle that exceeds the amount of money that they're making. He teaches that you should never open a credit card for any reason, ever. And honestly, he's right about the credit card industry. It keeps a lot of people stuck in the trap of living beyond their means and living paycheck to paycheck. Even if people have the best intentions of never carrying a balance, a lot of them get carried away and find themselves stuck in debt. So I fully agree with Dave on the dangers of credit cards. I also think that for the most part, people are way too worried about credit card perks and travel points. If people spend the same amount of time working on their budget and their investments as they did researching credit cards and the points they're going to get from them, then the average American would be a lot better off because of it. It's not to say that these perks are bad. I have a few credit cards of my own that I use for some of these perks and point systems, but it should not be the number one focus. And for a lot of people, it is. That being said, here is where I do disagree with Dave. I think that every American needs to responsibly use credit cards to build their credit score. Dave's counter argument to this would be, well, you don't need a good credit score if you never plan on taking out a loan. So having good credit is pointless if you plan to live a debt-free life. And while Dave is generally correct, there is one exception, which is purchasing a home. When you go to purchase your first home and take out a mortgage, you're going to have a very hard time qualifying for that mortgage if you don't have credit history. When I bought my first house at 23, it was very easy to get approved because I had been using credit cards since I turned 18, which resulted in me getting a pretty good credit score by the time I was ready to purchase a house. Now, Dave does talk about some alternative methods for getting a mortgage on a house even if you don't have a credit score, but it's going to be much less headache if you just use credit cards very responsibly and build your credit score so that you're prepared to borrow money for a house. So because of that, I do think that everyone should have a credit card just for the purpose of building their credit history. However, if you ever do take out a credit card to build your credit, make sure you pay off your balance in full every month. Never carry credit card debt. If you find yourself doing that, you need to cancel your credit cards immediately. You're not a credit card person. And you also need to make sure that even if you are paying off your balance in full every month, that you're not letting the credit card incentives and rewards incentivize you to spend more money than you normally would, because that's why they're there. When you get cash back, it reduces the burden of that purchase just a little bit and results in you spending more money. So you just need to be very aware that you're using these cards responsibly. You also need to make sure that you go ahead and you hit that subscribe button. Again, we're trying to get to 350 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it. Thanks. Anyway, the second piece of advice that I would disagree with Dave on is the $1,000 starter emergency fund. If you are in debt and you plan to follow Dave Ramsey's plan to get out of it, then the first step he's going to have you do is save up a $1,000 starter emergency fund. Now, just to clarify, this small emergency fund is only supposed to get you through the portion that you're paying off debt. Once you're debt free, you'll save up a fully funded emergency fund worth 3 to 6 months of expenses. So we're only talking about the starter baby emergency fund. And suggesting that someone should have a safety net while they're getting out of debt seems like pretty harmless advice, right? Well, actually, this is probably one of Dave's most controversial things that he teaches. And that's because most people do not think that $1,000 is enough. And his advice on having a starter emergency fund of $1,000 has not changed at all since then. Obviously, because of inflation, $1,000 today isn't worth nearly as much as it was when he started giving this advice. So many critics think that Dave needs to get with the times and increase this amount. And Dave responds to this criticism by stating that $1,000 was never supposed to be enough. It's enough to get you by while you're getting out of debt, but it's also not supposed to make you feel completely safe. Dave wants you to be a little scared when you're paying off debt so that you stay motivated and you get it done. And I don't disagree with Dave's underlying logic here. If you are in bad consumer debt, you should be throwing as much money as possible towards paying it off. You don't want a ton of money sitting in the bank doing nothing when you can instead use that to get out of a bad situation. That being said, I can think of a lot of situations where I've had an unexpected expense come up that's more than $1,000. And that's okay because I have a fully funded emergency fund to cover that. However, if I was in the process of getting out of debt and I only had $1,000 saved up for an emergency, well then every time I had one of those emergencies that was more than $1,000, it would be a major setback and I would probably have to go into more debt to pay that off. So to me, a good balance would be to instead save up a starter emergency fund that's worth 1 month of your living expenses while you're getting out of debt. That's going to offer you some cushion while you're in your debt payoff mode, but it's also not too much, so you're still dedicating most of the money that you have towards paying off debt. Okay, the third piece of advice that I'm going to disagree with Dave on is the 15-year mortgage. Remember, Dave hates debt with a passion, and he will never recommend it to anyone. The mortgage is the only time where he will remotely tolerate debt. And even then, he only recommends that people get a 15-year mortgage so that they can have their home paid off quicker than if they had a 30-year mortgage. And even on top of that, he recommends putting extra money towards your house payoff so that, again, your home can be paid off as quickly as possible. And it's not that this advice is bad. Let's say you follow it. Worst case scenario, in 15 years, you have a fully paid off home. That's going to put you in a better situation than a vast majority of Americans. However, I don't like the 15-year mortgage for a couple reasons. Number one, it's going to be very hard to find a house that's affordable on a 15-year mortgage today with today's prices and today's interest rates. And the second reason I don't love the 15-year mortgage is that it's not really the best way to maximize your money depending on where interest rates are at. So let's address that first reason, which is it's just hard to afford a house on a 15-year mortgage right now. For example, a $500,000 15-year mortgage with today's interest rates would mean you would have to pay $4,238 every month. And if we look at a $500,000 mortgage on a 30-year term, your monthly payment would drop down to $3,322 a month, which is still a lot. That still hurts to even read, but it's a lot more manageable than the 15-year mortgage. And the second reason I don't love the 15-year mortgage is, again, it just doesn't allow you to optimize your finances in the best way, especially in times where we have lower interest rates. Think about it this way. If you have a mortgage with an interest rate of 5%, when you make an extra payment on top of your regular monthly payment, you are essentially getting a 5% return on that money because you no longer have to pay interest on the extra money that you paid towards your house. And that's not bad. But let's say instead of investing extra money towards your house, you took that money and you invested it in the stock market and you got a return of 8%. Well, that's 3% higher than if you had instead put that money towards your house. And that might seem like a small difference, but with compound interest, that might result in hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. You just need to look at the returns that you can get on your money in other places before just dumping it into your home. In my case, I have a 2.8% interest rate on my house, which I get it is really low. Interest rates aren't even close to that right now. We're probably never going to see interest rates like that again. So I'm really lucky to have that interest rate. But for me, I feel very comfortable with my money instead being invested in the stock market instead of putting extra money towards paying off my house. So I just mentioned this to drive the point home that it might not be the most optimal solution to pay off your home early. Again, interest rates are pretty high today. So today it might make sense to put extra money towards your house, but you always just need to be looking at what your interest rate is, what return can you get elsewhere, and make a decision that's best for you. All right, and that brings us to the last part of the video, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, investing. Dave's main point that I want to disagree with here is that you can assume that your investments are going to earn 12% a year, which is something that Dave teaches and says pretty often. And I have to admit, a 12% year over year return does seem a little far-fetched. And let's say even if you were able to achieve that, when you're modeling out your future and you're making assumptions, you always want to be conservative. We all hope that the stock market's going to blow up and we're going to become multimillionaires, but we need to have a more conservative approach when looking at our futures. Also, if you were able to achieve 12% returns year over year, you would be a statistical anomaly. You'd be an all-time great investor. To put it in perspective, the S&P 500 has averaged just about a 10% return since it started including 500 of the largest US stocks in 1957. And you should note that it's very difficult to beat the S&P 500, and that's only a 10% return. I say only, that's a great return, but you get my point. Well, according to the most recent Spiebel report, almost 88% of large cap investment funds failed to beat the S&P 500 over a 15-year period. And those are investment professionals trying to beat it. That's not referring to everyday people who are just buying stocks on their own. And the odds only get worse as time goes on. And because of this, I don't think someone should run their assumptions and models based on the fact that they are going to be one of the best investors of all time. And a lot of people get carried away because it's relatively easy to outperform the market once, right? You might buy a stock, it might blow up, and you might get lucky for 1 year. The odds of you doing it the next year, lower. The odds of doing that over a 10-year span, very low. A 15-year span, we just went over the numbers. Statistically, it's very improbable. So like I said, I like to be more conservative. When I'm running my own numbers, I assume that I'm going to have an average interest rate year over year of 8%. And I'm not a financial advisor, so don't take that to heart. That's just what I do when I'm looking at my investments. And hopefully it will do a little bit better than that and be closer to the 10% that the S&P 500 averages. But again, I just want to drive home the point. It's always good to make assumptions conservatively. Okay, that's enough negativity. I just want to end this video by saying that I think that Dave Ramsey's program has done so much good for so many Americans. It is clear, it is conservative, and it's probably the most guaranteed way of building a net worth of $1 million or more. Dave has helped a lot of people, and he should be very proud of the impact that he's made. But that's gonna do it for this video. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think of Dave Ramsey and his financial principles? Do you disagree with anything I said in this video? I wanna hear about it. Again, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.